Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. S. Jashankar, Honorable Minister of External Affairs. On behalf of the Center for Air Power Studies, it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. S. Jashankar to the 7th Jasjit Singh Memorial Lecture. I would like to now invite Air Vice Marshal Anil Gulani, Director General CAPS, to deliver the welcome remarks.
Dr. S. Jashankar, the guest of honor for the day, Shri Sanjay Baru, Session Chair and a founder trustee of the Forum for National Security Studies, Air Chief Marshal V.R. Chaudhary, Chief of Air Staff, former Air Chiefs, civil and military officers, friends from the media, and very special members from the family of Air Commodore Jasjit Singh, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to you all. Welcome to the 7th Air Commodore Jasjit Singh Memorial Lecture. On this occasion, we are going to miss Mr. M.K. Rasgotra, former Foreign Secretary and the Chairman of the Trust, that is FNSS, as he is indisposed. And Shri N.N. Vora, also another founder trustee, who is not able to attend, has conveyed his best wishes for the event. As you all are well aware, Air Commodore Jasjit Singh was the founder director of the Center for Air Power Studies, a national security think tank that he set up in the year 2001. CAPS has since then grown into a credible institution on matters related to aerospace security, nuclear energy security and strategy, the Indo-Pacific region, and the challenges in our neighborhood. It was the vision and mission of Jasjit Singh to nurture the intellectual capital of the country and imbue it with a sense of national security consciousness. He made sure that CAPS engaged in this mission through conduct of in-depth research and its dissemination through seminars and publications. We are proud to have published over 270 books, apart from our flagship quarterly journals on air power and defense and diplomacy. Last year, we also introduced another biannual journal on air power called Blue Yonder. After the demise of Air Commodore Jasjit Singh in 2013, at 79, CAPS began commemorating his valuable contribution to national security through a lecture in his memory. And we are fortunate to have Dr. Jashankar with us, who also gave the second memorial lecture in 2018. Air Commodore Jasjit Singh was born on 8 July 1934 and served as a fighter pilot in the Indian Air Force for 32 years from 56 to 88, taking active part in both the 65 and the 71 wars. In the 71 war, he flew a number of missions over heavily defended enemy areas, and in spite of heavy enemy opposition, he pressed home on his attacks. He was awarded the Veer Chakra for gallantry. He later commanded 17th Squadron at Halwara from January 75 to April 77. The squadron now flies the Rafale aircraft and is based in Ambala. During his squadron command, he was awarded the Vayu Sena Medal, and later, subsequently, as Group Captain, as Director of Operations at Air Headquarters, he was awarded the Ati Vishisht Seva Medal. Jasjit Singh was a passionate advocate of national security, and after retirement from the Air Force in 1984, he joined the Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis, now known as Manohar Parrikar Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis, and was its longest-serving Director General from 87 to 2001. He was also the founder director, as I have said earlier, of the Center for Air Power Studies, a post that he held till his demise for 12 years. And he wrote a number of books on air power, nuclear and national strategy, Asian security, Asia Pacific, India-Pakistan issues, essays on China, Indian Ocean, Kargil War, joint operations, military leadership, and you name it. The canvas was rather wide, and as I read, if you read his writings today, he was rather prescient in his writings about what we are witnessing today. He also wrote The Icon, a biography of the Marshal of the Air Force, Arjun Singh. At the National Security Advisory Board under his mentor K. Subramaniam, he made important contributions on national security and the draft nuclear doctrine for India. He was highly regarded in international strategic circles. Air Commodore Jasjit Singh was awarded the Padma Bhushan in 2006 for his contribution to strategic thought. There is no doubt that the real challenge for Indian foreign policy today is to navigate through a world of greater multipolarity and weaker multilateralism. This has not only evolved Delhi's worldview but also of the world towards New Delhi, and increasingly requires a grand strategy for New Delhi to deal with the shifts in global politics. Some of the major shifts that the world today is witnessing include the return of major wars like the interstate wars in Europe and West Asia, a challenge to the US hegemony leading to some scholars imagining a post-American world order coupled with the belligerent rise of China. The guardrails of multilateral institutions that emerged post the world wars and survived during the Cold War have been cast aside as they have failed in preventing conflict in Europe, West Asia, and increasingly in Africa too. These institutions also face difficulty in cementing consensus over larger issues such as climate change. To speak to us on all these issues and India's grand strategy in an uncertain multipolar world amidst shifting balance of power and rising nationalism, we are indeed honored to have Dr. S. Jaishankar with us, who has been India's External Affairs Minister since 30th of May 2019. A career diplomat turned politician, he has been instrumental in raising India's voice on the global high table and ensuring that a rising India gets its due. Dr. Jaishankar is a recipient of Padma Shri and has written widely acclaimed best-selling books, The India Way, Strategies for an Uncertain World, published in 2020, and Why Bharat Matters, published this year. His talk would be followed by a short Q&A session. I now invite Mr. Sanjay Baru, the session chair, who is also a founder trustee of FNSS, to make his remarks and then invite Dr. Jaishankar for the talk. Thank you.
Mr. Minister, Director General, Chief of Air Staff, former Chiefs, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and members of Air Commodore Jasjit Singh's family. As a founder trustee of FNSS and the Center for Air Power Studies, it is my privilege this afternoon to welcome you all, especially our chief guest, Dr. Jaishankar. Air Commodore Jasjit Singh was a soldier, a scholar, and an institution builder. At this annual memorial lecture every year, we celebrate all these three aspects of Air Commodore Jasjit Singh's personality, especially his record as an institution builder. Under the guidance of Mr. K. Subramaniam, who's been mentor to many of us in this hall and father to our chief guest, the Institute of Defense Studies emerged as an important think tank. And if you don't mind my saying this, Mr. Minister, to embarrass you a bit, it should have been named after your father and not after a politician. Having finished his tenure at IDSA, Air Commodore Jasjit Singh created what should now be called not just the Center for Air Power Studies, but the Center for Aerospace Power and Strategic Studies. Because if you look at the record of CAPS over the last couple of decades, not only is the quality of work of a very high standard, but the range of work at CAPS has spanned much more than simply air power. some of the scholarship on our neighborhood, on our nuclear policy, on our relations with major powers, and so on and so forth, have established CAPS as one of prominent institutions in this city and in this country. And we owe it to Air Commodore Jasjit Singh for the leadership he gave. I had the opportunity of first meeting him exactly 30 years ago in 1994 when I took charge as the editorial page editor of the Times of India, and Mr. Subramaniam was our consulting editor, and he introduced me to Jasjit and requested me to begin to invite him to write for us. Those of you who will recall that period will remember the very important contribution of Mr. Subramaniam, of Jasjit, and of the IDSA in shaping the discourse in this country on the issue of comprehensive test ban treaty, as well as on our nuclear policy and program. Between 94 and 98, when we finally declared ourselves a nuclear weapons power, these gentlemen and those of us who were trained by them, encouraged by them to write and think about these issues, in many ways shaped India's strategic policy, which culminated in the writing of the nuclear doctrine by the NSAB chaired by Mr. Subramaniam. Subsequently, Air Commodore Jasjit Singh took the initiative to create a group which included Mr. Vora, who's not here with us today, and others. And we traveled the world trying to convince people who were our critics, from Tokyo in the east to Washington in the west, why we went nuclear. And I think Jasjit's enormous writing on some of these strategic issues makes him much more than a student of air power, which is why, sir, I say that we must, in fact, broaden the title of the organization to capture the range of its work. Finally, Mr. Minister, let me embarrass you a second time by saying that in this country over the last 75 years, almost every Prime Minister has left his imprint on foreign policy. But I cannot really think of any foreign minister who has left his imprint on foreign policy in the manner you have. Sometimes I agree with you, sometimes I disagree with you, but we always recognize, and I certainly always recognize, the importance of your thinking, the importance of your energy in traveling around the world and upholding India's interests in an extremely difficult phase in world history. And I'm therefore delighted that you have chosen for your subject this evening a perspective on how India ought to be dealing in these turbulent times with a emerging multipolar world. I welcome you on behalf of the institution and the audience to deliver this lecture. The floor is yours.
Air Vice Marshal Anil Golani, Dr. Sanjay Baru, Chief, former chiefs, former bosses, Air Commodore Jasjit Singh's family, distinguished guests. I'm very glad to join you all today and deliver the Jasjit Singh Memorial Lecture at this FNSS CAPS event. This is naturally an occasion to discuss issues with which Air Commodore Jasjit Singh was closely associated with in his lifetime. But before doing so, I request you to indulge me in some personal memories of someone who we considered a part of our family. For me, Jasjit was initially a colleague and a friend of my father. The considerable overlap in our areas of interest and profession were naturally the subjects of our conversation. But our relationship became much closer in 1986 when he came to the United States where I was then posted, as part of our effort to block the sale of AWACS aircraft to Pakistan. We traveled the length and breadth of the United States together, from the Pentagon, State Department, and the Congress in Washington, D.C., to the Air War College in Montgomery, the Naval one in Newport, and ended up actually at the PACOM headquarters in Hawaii. It was a real experience watching Jasjit nuance his arguments to the audience and make his points with moderation and credibility. To people in the Congress and the bureaucracy, he gave tactful tutorials. To his fellow military officers in the United States, he spoke a language they understood. And believe me, for someone like me in the profession of diplomacy, these were very important learnings. Along the way, I got a taste of his sardonic humor, his insights into the military culture, into other military cultures, especially he had fascinating stories about Iraq, and his considerable knowledge of Afghanistan. And you must bear in mind at that time we are talking of the 80s, so the Afghan jihad, the war was on against the USSR. Now, time moved on, so did we. And for the next 3 decades, Jasjit and I spoke often, we met occasionally when I was here, but we interacted closely one way or the other. My last memories of him was when I was ambassador in China. And I must say that more than many others then, he understood the challenge we confronted. Now, many of you know Jasjit as a senior service colleague, as a strategic thinker, and as an opinion shaper. He belonged, as Dr. Baru just reminded us, he belonged to that generation which actually took national security debates out of bureaucratic closets and squarely into public space. Equally important, he was a pioneer in bridging the uniformed and civilian domains on this subject. Like all of you, I too value these two contributions immensely because they are part of our systematic evolution as a major power. Indeed, it is endeavors such as his that contributed to the emergence of a more holistic view of national security, just as they have spurred a review of our defense practices and assumptions. Now, when I look back at Jasjit's writings, and occasionally I pull out books from my bookshelf, what makes them stand out then and even now is actually the experience and judiciousness which was reflected in his articulation. He understood that for decision makers, different, sometimes very even contradictory equities need to be taken into account. There are second and third order consequences of many decisions. Thought processes and responses of others have to be anticipated and factored in. Understanding our own capabilities and appreciating the larger context is equally necessary. Most important, grandstanding should be avoided to enable serious discussion. Many of these considerations permeated Jasjit's approach, be it to our nuclear strategy, to defense challenges, or to national security calculations. He could be sharp, but he was never polemical. That was a key reason why the policy world also took his advice and his writings so seriously. The period when Jasjit actively contributed to the national security discourse was actually one of extraordinary change, both for our country and for the world. Let us think back on those 3 decades. The Cold War ended, the USSR disintegrated, a thaw began in our relations with the United States. Pakistan actually revived due to the Afghan war, and China rapidly modernized and grew its comprehensive national power. These were the very years when in India we had our 1991 economic crisis, began an era of coalition governments, debated the exercise of our nuclear option, stood up on pressures on Jammu and Kashmir, and sought a modus vivendi with both China and Pakistan. Now, many of these trends intensified with the passage of time. Some produced outcomes, while others remain open issues even today. The nuclear test and the subsequent diplomacy, and I'm glad Sanjay referred to the subsequent diplomacy because people often underestimate that part of how we manage the world after our tests. These are examples of the former. The picture in respect of both Pakistan and China has also considerably changed. The incipient openings of the 1990s became real opportunities in regard to the United States. The politics of our neighborhood also started reflecting these larger global trends. In all this, my takeaway from the many interactions with Jasjit was the manner in which he always put India's interests at the center of his thinking. He sought to get the best for us from a dynamic and fast-changing world, even if it meant departing radically from the past. At the same time, his prescriptions were always sober, always grounded, and always practical. So today, we could ask ourselves, how would Jasjit have dealt with the world that we confront currently? I believe that as a soldier, he was an inherently competitive person and would have approached it with those instincts. In a sense, the topic for this lecture itself, and by the way, I didn't pick it. I mean, somebody else did and they really loaded it on. But the topic for this lecture itself provides an answer. First, he would have definitely applied himself to fashioning a grand strategy. And that is because one is needed for India to emerge as a leading power in the coming decade and develop a global footprint beyond that. Second, he would have dissected the uncertainties of our times, of which COVID, conflict, and climate change are significant examples. Obviously, that could have called for appropriate solutions in various domains, capturing issues like pandemic cooperation, connectivity initiatives, or economic resilience. He would have certainly advocated for a multipolar world, not only because it is increasingly a fact of life, but since it is a natural expression of global diversity. An outcome of rebalancing and globalization, it is driving the very nature of the global order, creating a new set of more consequential powers, and enhancing the regionalization of international politics. Of course, Jasjit would have noted rising nationalism as a global trend, a phenomenon, by the way, that has multiple causes. Wherever we may stand on that issue, its reality cannot be denied. But in addition to all of this, I do feel that he would have given the consequences of technology advancement on world politics its full due. It was a subject close to his heart, but its revolutionary implications on the balance of power would probably have fascinated him. At the same time, his strong sense of history would have enabled him to take a long view of all these developments. With that in mind, let us contemplate the world around us currently. The foundation for any strategizing is obviously to understand the landscape. It is only when there is a proper appreciation of its contradictions and possibilities that any nation can plan its growth and advancement. The first feature in that regard is, we have already spoken about it, the emergence of multipolarity. Multipolarity is still in its early stages. It is unevenly developed and it's imperfectly evolved. Grasping its intricacies is therefore itself an enormous challenge. At times, we could overestimate it. On other occasions, it could actually disappoint. Part of the problem is that depending on the metric used, a different set of prominent players emerge in calculations. Military multipolarity, for example, is currently very different from the economic one, or indeed from those of technology, energy, of resources, or other currencies of power. In fact, an overlapping Venn diagram would naturally reduce the number of consequential powers. But as we are seeing from current events, having strong sectoral strengths can itself be very impactful. Another dimension which is also gaining ground arises from the regionalization of power distribution. With the end of the Cold War and the dissipation of that brief period of unipolarity, the world is dealing with the weakening of an overarching architecture. No nation, indeed no alliance, has the ability anymore to impose its will across the world. Not just that, all of them are so chary of commitments that very often they willingly leave players in any region to sort out a particular problem. As a result, middle powers, who in any case are growing in weight and growing in numbers, now have greater space to pursue their interests. Ideally, this should be accompanied by taking on greater responsibilities. That unfortunately doesn't happen in every case. Now, speaking about metrics of power, the ability to disrupt is itself today a very impactful strategic tool in a globalized era. Because the world is so connected, supply chains are so extended, connectivity is still so limited, and time is money. There are opportunities waiting to be exploited by those who have adequate capabilities and a high risk appetite. We can all see what is happening in the Red Sea. The efficiencies of our times have created accompanying vulnerabilities whose exploitation is no longer a function of just orthodox power. Now, having said that, there is also the reality of aggregating many of these trends. Combinations of nations coming together on a specific agenda, sometimes even limited in time and space, are a growing feature of contemporary international relations. Many of them can be benign, they can even be irrelevant to the exercise of power. And India, by the way, has joined or initiated almost 40 such groupings in the last decade. But from time to time, there could be endeavors that have a larger implication for a theater or for a region in terms of stability, security, progress, and prosperity. The Quad and the Indo-Pacific come to mind in this context, since they address deficits in ensuring global good. A very different example are the understandings among certain nations that influence capabilities, including in the midst of conflict. What is common is that in the era of multipolarity, all nations benefit from converging partners. The lesson here is to get beyond the old mold of alliance thinking, something that analysts of that culture find extremely hard to do. While on that subject, a debate on the merits and costs of alliance are also very much a feature of our times. Here too, we have conflicting trends, some emanating from geopolitics, others reflecting domestic divisions. Those who have spent the last 8 decades comfortable in alliance structures are today very worried nations. Others are not indifferent, but are probably nimble enough to seek creative solutions to ensure security and stability. It is hard to predict where this will go, mainly because the nature of challenges themselves vary from region to region. Much as they would deny, most nations are relatively detached on matters that do not immediately impact them. A paradox of our times is that the interdependence of globalization coexists with the self-centeredness of prosperity. Who will step forward, to what degree, on which issue, is getting harder to gauge. Now, if all of this was not enough, let us also recognize that the very nature of power has changed. Application of force is less necessary now to exert influence. In fact, it is often counterproductive. Instead, we have seen the increasing leveraging of economic factors and of technology in world affairs. Sanctions are an extreme example. A more frequent one is to use market shares of everything from exports and imports, resources and services, debt and technology for political purposes. In fact, the very nature of globalization itself is today a national security concern for many of us. That is why we need reliable and resilient supply chains, trusted and transparent digital partners, a diversification of production centers, greater connectivity options. In fact, I would say a serious effort at fairer and more secure re-globalization. Only then can we de-risk not just the global economy, but international affairs itself. The role of rising nationalism in shaping world affairs must also be recognized. In those parts of the world where the old globalization mantra still prevails, nationalism is a bad word. But the truth is that they do reflect the frustration in many developed societies, where the quality of life has been eroded by bad geopolitical and geoeconomic choices. In the developing world, however, the picture is understandably very different. It was nationalism, after all, that triggered independence, growth, rebalancing, and led to multipolarity. In many societies, as these trends matured, more authentic representation took root. They naturally would like to extend rebalancing to its cultural facets as well. Like it or not, the world will be significantly more nationalistic in the foreseeable future. And that means greater individualism, a stronger sense of caution on external commitments, and a global architecture that will be considerably less disciplined. In this context, it is imperative that India clinically evaluate global happenings and calculate its benefits. Often, what is good for us as national interest is also good for the world. That arises partly from the tight connection that we have nurtured with the Global South and the confidence that they repose in us. There are multiple divides and frictions in the world now, many of them overlapping. The fundamental one is between those powers competing for the top of the global hierarchy. In some cases, our interests are directly affected, and we should not be timid about making choices that benefit us. There would be occasions when we may not wish to be drawn in on terms that are set by others. By and large, the optimal approach would be to make our judgment and then seek common ground with similar players. From time to time, situations could arise where we may also have to just play our own hand. A multi-vector foreign policy with national security and CNP growth at its core is obviously the answer for India in these circumstances. The fact is that the fifth largest economy in the world, likely to be the third soon, with the kind of external interests that we have developed and will continue to grow, we cannot shirk responsibilities. In fact, it is very much in our interest that this uncertain world is stabilized to the extent possible by rules, by regimes, and by law. And equally important, we have a say in fashioning them. If Air Commodore Jasjit was here to strategize with us, my guess is that he would say, 1, build core strengths and deep capabilities ASAP, especially for a world of chips, drones, space, and underwater. Rashtra Suraksha is Atmanirbharta. 2, focus on technology and related HR. Prepare for the era of AI that we have entered. Create the institutional capacities and practices for it. 3, mitigate external exposure to leveraging by building multiple options. 4, find convergent partners and advance specific agendas, no matter if they sometimes are at odds. Diplomacy will find a way. Trust us. 5, leapfrog on capabilities, outthink on tactics, and don't be gamed. And 6, fix the bane of all systems, that is siloed thinking. Integration, jointness, and holistic approaches are not just military challenges, but systemic ones as well. So let me conclude by saying this. The last decade has been very different in so many dimensions. The global landscape has changed and will continue to do so. India's primary concerns and challenges also have, reflecting that transformation. We are looking at new forms of competition that take advantage of high interpenetration and interdependence. The task before us is to effectively address challenges and confidently exploit opportunities. We have more resources now, but also have higher stakes. There is no question that the world is more volatile and it is more complicated, but I have little doubt that Air Commodore Jasjit Singh would have exhorted us to plan well to rise in an uncertain world. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Jaishankar, for this erudite talk. I think you make it sound so simplistic with those 5 or 6 bullet points as to what we should be doing. And I'm sure that as far as we are concerned, we are in safe hands with you navigating us through these choppy and troubled waters. We'll open the house for questions. So may I request you to please raise your hand, introduce yourself, keep the questions brief, and we will take 3 questions at a time and then proceed. Yes, Dr. Shalini.
Thank you, sir. My question is for our Honorable Minister Jasjit. It's always a pleasure listening to you, sir. Sir, you spoke about changing nature of power. My question is related to region, India's immediate neighborhood. We have a neighborhood first policy and there are struggling economies in the region except India. In your view, how critical is the regional economic integration for India's rise in power dynamics? And what are the limitations we need to overcome for enhanced regional economic integration?
A very good afternoon to you, sir. My name is Air Commodore Sabharwal, and I am from the Indian Air Force. So, having read your book, sir, and in which you very nicely summarized the Indian foreign policy as saying we need to engage the United States and we need to manage China, or cultivate Europe, reassure Russia, and bring Japan to play. Now, coming to Japan, my question is related towards the Indo-Pacific, sir. In a recent visit to the Indo-Pacific region and specifically to Japan and Philippines, the impression that we got was the strategic autonomy of India has got acceptance, a large acceptance there. That is one. However, the business ethics are a little they need to be worked out in a little better manner so as to engage Japan in a more beneficial way. That is one. The question is, do you feel there is a case in point to indulge in the Indo-Pacific in a more aggressive manner to supplement our emergence as a global economic power within the framework of strategic autonomy? Thank you, sir.
Yeah, Javed.
Good afternoon, sir. Javed Alam, Center for Air Power Studies. Sir, you have mentioned the role of AI in the immediate future of India and the globe. How do you see India's role in terms of, placing AI policies around the world and in India itself? And where exactly do you think India can play an important role in terms of shaping the narrative towards AI, both for civilian as well as defensive purposes? Thank you.
Thank you all for the questions. Let's start with the neighborhood. What we have tried to do, especially in the last 10 years, but the groundwork in some ways had started before that, is actually to do exactly what was latent in your question, which was economically bring our neighbors much closer. We recognize today that given our history, given the size of the neighbors, given the sociology of our neighbors and of ourselves, that there are, these are not easy relationships to manage. There will be political ups and downs in many of our neighbors, often, rousing sentiments about India is a very easy way out. These are realities we have to accept. But we also need to appreciate we today have more resources, more capabilities. We are geographically at the center. Our size is so much bigger. So if you look really, I would say, because I think that kind of sharp focus and this thinking that, look, we need to drive, the process. I mean, we will set the pace. We will go the extra mile. So if you look today at our neighbors, in many cases today we have, power grids. We even have power plants. We are exporting or importing energy. We have fuel pipelines. We have road, rail, waterway connections. We use ports. What we have done is we have tried to proof the relationship against political ups and downs. From time to time we are challenged. There have been occasions in some of our neighbors when we have become the political issue. And if you look at the extent of proofing, I would actually suggest to you, we've done some good work there, that we have actually managed to mitigate some very sharp situations. So I do see that really as a continuing issue. I think it is a policy which I feel has served us well. It needs to be built upon. And in many ways, to me, the 2 or 3 crisis points, or, where they have really judged us. One, I think, was the Sri Lanka economic crisis. That while, everybody else, including the IMF, was taking its own sweet time, we actually moved very decisively, very quickly, and very massively. Our bilateral package is 1.5 times the IMF package. And today, if anybody goes to Sri Lanka and look at really what public opinion in Sri Lanka feels about us, and, we have some pretty complicated history in that country, you can see the impact that it has made. I would say to some degree it has also been the case with the other neighbors when it came to COVID, that, almost all the neighbors got their first vaccines from us. When the Ukraine conflict took place, they appreciated the fact that in many cases, many of them actually had, because they buy basically energy on the spot market, many of them were actually not even getting response to their tenders because of the tight energy market at that point. Now they realized having a pipeline to India, being part of a larger economy's pull factor is something that benefits them. So, the neighborhoods for any country, especially for big countries, will never be easy. But neighborhoods need hard work, and frankly, given some other neighbors that we have and they have, neighborhoods will also be very competitive. And, there's no point moaning and groaning about it. I think if we have a competition, we need to compete. And that's really what we are trying to do. So, at least in our neighborhood, we have shown that we have the ability to stand up, to push our interests, to compete against other countries, and often, I would say, out-resource them and definitely outperform them. So, I do think we have a very, solid record out there. On Japan, I wasn't entirely clear on one comment. You said something about business ethics, but I do accept that, with Japan, there is scope for growing business. We've done decently on investment. We have a target of 5 trillion yen, which is $42 billion till 2027 as new investments to come in for those 5 years. We have, I believe, reached about halfway in the target. That's what I was told. But the fact is, given today, the changing geoeconomics and new investment strategies of many countries, we have to work much harder with Japan. My own sense, I've just come back from Japan day before yesterday, and yesterday actually evening we had the Speaker of the Japanese Parliament here with a political business mixed delegation. We have, in a sense, a basic political understanding. I think the strategic people in Japan also appreciate that they have to work with India, that our interests are very convergent. My sense is the business logic still hasn't got that kind of, I would say, weight and momentum in their own system. It's doing decently, but at a certain flat level. We are not seeing pickups. There are some good trends. In fact, this week there's been big investment ramp-ups by both Toyota and Suzuki. But we need to see something much bigger than that. But I think the really missing piece, to me, is the societal connect, the skill connect, the language connect. Some of you would be shocked that among South Asians, actually India has the lowest number of people in Japan. That there are more Nepalis, Sri Lankans, Bangladeshis, Pakistanis working in Japan than there are Indians. If you look at the number of students, there are 1.3 million students, Indian students across the world. There are 1,500 Indian students in Japan. So there are big gaps there. And we need to work much harder at those gaps, because especially with Japan, if you don't drill down and make it happen and, fix it bottom up, it's not going to unfold by itself. It's not a headline-driven relationship. It is actually a bottom-up, grunt work kind of relationship. On the AI question, I would just say this, AI is probably maybe even more than nuclear weapons. I can't think of any technology shifts, in the last many decades, if not centuries, which is going to change global politics more than AI. Obviously, efforts are on to, call it what you are, guardrails, rules, regimes, to do something. When something new and disruptive comes into world politics, there is on one side an effort which is made to see can we manage its impact and create a kind of common ground. On the other hand, it has such immense possibilities that its competitive, the sense of competitiveness associated with it is also very, very strong. So it is very likely that while doing a little bit of this guardrails, the truth is that many gloves would be off in many countries when it comes to AI.
We'll take another set of questions at the back. Radhe?
Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, sir. This is Radhe from CAPS, Research Associate. Last month, you took the first bilateral state visit under this government was to Mauritius, and we also had the head of governments present at the initiation ceremony. In this context, the question is, how can India leverage its interests in the island nations of the Indian Ocean, especially at a time when the competition between India and China is now slipping from the open maritime space into these island countries? And how can India improve their trade deficit with us? Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry? How can India improve
Their trade deficit with us, the Indian Ocean island countries.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Commodore Sanjay Dikuna from the Indian Navy. Yes, sir. So my question starts firstly, we are witnessing a change from traditional regionalism as we understand it to a form of new regionalism, which is not based entirely on balance of power, but more on social constructivist sort of thoughts that are based on socio-cultural civilization harking back to ancient times. We have an advantage specifically in the Indian Ocean region. It's linked to the previous question. How do we utilize this inherent capability that we have of soft power and socio-cultural connect with the Indian Ocean to further our interests specifically in our immediate neighborhood, especially when such countries are engaged in omni-enmeshment and balance of interests rather than just balance of power?
Yes, General Yadav.
Sir, I'm General R.S. Yadav from the USI. I did a paper 20 years ago to say that US-Indo relationship, whether a myth or a reality.
Indo-US relationship. Can you just Third row.
So my question is that I did a paper 20 years ago to say that Indo-US relationship, strategic relationship, a myth or a reality. The question still rankles because we can't deny geography, and for India to emerge as Viksit Bharat by 2047, our periphery and the neighborhood ought to be peaceful, where China happens to be the main driver. Thank you.
On the Mauritius, the Indian Ocean question, in many ways, what I spoke about neighborhood applies to the Indian Ocean. It is, by the way, part of our neighborhood. I mean, there is nothing between me and Mauritius except a body of water. So, again, if you see the last decade, in fact, one of the important changes in our foreign policy is the extent to which we have become today a development partner, an infrastructure constructor, services provider, a military trainer, and in fact military equipment provider to many of our neighbors. So Mauritius is actually a textbook case. I mean, if today I wanted people, if I wanted to convince you about how well MEA has done, that would be where I would take you to market my ministry. That if you look today at the public, the Metro Express which has been built, the Supreme Court, the main hospital, the social housing, it's actually been a textbook case for delivering projects below cost before time. And it shows what is possible when you put your mind to it. Now, in the case of Indian Ocean, as I said, the competition that I am braced for, which in fact has been happening, which is happening around my neighborhood, will definitely happen in the Indian Ocean too, because I think the Indian Ocean is already seeing the beginnings of, presence, maritime presence, which was not there before. So it is poised for a disruptive change. I think we need to anticipate it, we need to prepare for it, and therefore for us, especially, part of the reason for this whole Sagar doctrine was actually to get it into the heads of the Indian system. That look, this is a vast area which we have actually neglected, or at least not given it the importance that we should have. So how to deal with it in an integrated way, how to, in many ways, create those pull factors, create those comforts, I think that's been very much key to it, and we are braced for competition there just as we are braced for competition in the rest of the neighborhood. Yes, they have, the nature of the countries, there would be, these are not countries where you're going to get a trade balance. But I think it's important, they're not even looking for one. They're looking for the right kind of support, that at a time, let us say, there's a Ukraine crisis, wheat is short, or if there's a climate issue and there's a rice market is difficult, or again, these are countries, many of whom got their first vaccines from us, or they have an oil spill. These are countries who are looking to be supported and, systemically assisted both, in good days and tough days. So that's really the posture that we have taken and will continue to take. On the new regionalism, here's the problem. There's definitely a plus with socio-cultural affinity, that societies, nations who share many things, obviously there's a lot, it's very easy to get along. But it also has its own wrinkles, that sometimes the very closeness can be a source of divergence, or sometimes even a source of suspicion. If you look at any region, it's interesting. Today when I spoke about one of the changes, which is a weakening global architecture and a stronger regional coming together, that's happening across the world. You see, we looked at the last decade, problems in the Gulf. The fact was, Gulf countries had a space to deal with it in a manner in which 20 years ago, 30 years ago, the world would not have let them deal with it in that manner. Now, to differing degrees it is happening. Even in the Middle East, if you see, what's happening today in Gaza. If you see yes, the United States is absolutely key to a solution. But the fact is, compare it, let us say, with 1973. When the US and Soviet Union took it upon themselves to solve a problem far away. Today you have many more players, a Qatar, a UAE, a Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, who feel, yes, we too, we also own part of it and we also are part of the solution. Now we're going to have more and more of this. In fact, to me, even the Sri Lanka crisis is illustrative of it. Very frankly, when we spoke to everybody else, the general sense was, well, it's your region, you do something about it. You need to take the lead. And that is going to be more and more actually the global situation. On balance of interest, that's a more civil way of dealing with balance of power. So I like it. As a diplomat, I am I have a certain partiality towards civility. But finally, what does it come down to? It comes down to the fact that the world is as intensely competitive. In fact, I would argue even more so than before. The need to build, national capabilities is even greater, particularly, as I said, since the overarching, architecture has weakened. And when this happens in that tussle, there will be regional balances of power, there will be beyond the region. To some extent, there will be some form of global as well, at least among the very big economies and polities of the world. So it will be very layered in a way. That's the kind of scenario I think which we should expect. And the last question, or not question but observation as I understood it, India, US, myth and reality. Look, I also reflected, in fact, when I think about Air Commodore Jasjit Singh, as I said, a lot of it goes back to the US relationship because that's where we really got to work with each other very closely. But the fact is, with the US, I think it's an interesting question to ask because at various points of time, there were, you could say, windows, there were opportunities. There was probably in the early 40s, 50s. Then there was after 1962. Then I have a bit of a question mark about it, you can say, in that Rajiv Gandhi era, but I think structurally we were too close to the Soviets for that really to work. I think we had to make, in fact, I would give more credit to Narasimha Rao as a person who in a way, freed up our system there more. And I think subsequently every government has built up on it. At least that's one policy which has not been inconsistent or partisan, actually, at least where the actual policy is concerned, whatever the public debate on it is. But the bottom line, and that's why I said, eventually we have to be very conscious of the context. Why is it that it's working, say, in 2024, when it didn't work so well, 25 years ago, 50 years ago, 75 years ago? Because I think the world has also changed. The world has changed, American interests have changed, the global competition has changed. Our value in the world is different for the world, but for the United States as well. America's utility for us is also very different. That also is not a point to be forgotten. So a large part of, when you say grand strategy, is actually to continuously, in today's parlance, keep pressing the refresh button. Because the moment we are 3 years, 5 years out of date, we are actually not on the right course. That we are pursuing something which is outdated, which is probably not going to happen because of that. So, to me, the US relationship, more than any other relationship, is a testimony to the changing world. And, when I read sometimes at the doomsday predictions on Indian foreign policy, which is the democratic right of everybody in a free country to do, I feel that often the pessimistic scenarios happen because they are behind the curve. They are not actually understanding today where the relationship is. That we have bumps. I'm not saying we don't. We have issues. We have divergences. But we are consistently beating market expectations. because the market is consistently behind us where this relationship is concerned. Not now, for the last 25 years.
Thank you, Dr. Jashankar. I think we're running out of time. You also have previous commitments, so we'll draw the Q&A session to a close with your permission.
I would like to thank Dr. S. Jashankar for a very inspiring and insightful talk and sharing his expertise with us. We all have indeed benefited out of it, sir. Now I would request Dr. Sanjay Baru, Founder, Trustee, FNSS, and Distinguished Fellow CAPS, to hand over a memento to Dr. S. Jashankar. I would now request AVM Anil Golani, DG CAPS, to deliver the concluding remarks. Thank you.
I think all that remains for me is to thank Dr. Jashankar for sparing time from his busy schedule and addressing us on a number of issues which I think are of significance, and there is a lot to mull over and ponder, and I can assure you that we at CAPS will continue the endeavor that was started by Jasjit Singh and look at all these issues and come out with suitable writings to not only educate the people at large, but the armed forces and the academia as well. Thank you once again, Dr. Jashankar, for coming and giving us this talk. May I request you all to please give a round of applause to Dr. Jashankar.